the self-titled World's Strongest Gay, Rob Kearney. He holds the American record for the log press and a 3 times World's Strongest Man competitor. Welcome to Making Gains in association with the University of Derby and Finnebrogues and Naked Bacon, the biggest revolution to happen to British breakfast in a generation. Now, I'm absolutely pumped to say our guest on today's show is one of the strongest human beings walking planet Earth. He is the American log press record holder. He is one of the nicest men in the entire strongman community. Also, the self-titled World's Strongest Gay, Rob Kearney. Welcome to Making Gains.
Radzi, what is going on, my man? How are you?
Thank you very much for waking up early for this, because it's what time where you are?
It is 6 a.m. right now.
So it is early and you've still got a smile on your face. But I've got to start by talking about the word courage, because that's the word I often think about when I think of you. Because it's one thing coming out as an openly gay strongman, the only person to do it in the professional community. But it's another thing to have your hair in a rainbow mohawk, which looks incredible, by the way, having rainbow-colored lycra and basically say to the world, I am what I am. I don't care what you think.
Yeah, it definitely was a statement. And it started out with just the leggings back when I was competing as a 105 kilo athlete back in 2015 when I first met my husband Joey. And it just kind of evolved into, just from wearing some bright orange lycra all the way to, the crazy rainbow swirlies that we see now. And, talking about the Mohawk, and so World's Strongest Man 2019 was slated to be one of my best competitions. And to this date, it still was. And World's Strongest Man that year happening in the US, in Florida, in June, which is Pride Month, and really decided to just come out and make a statement as, this was my first World's Strongest Man in the United States. I had competed twice before, but it was Botswana and the Philippines. So, being on home soil during Pride Month, I wanted to kind of make that statement and show my pride and my true colors coming into World's Strongest Man that year. So, not only was I favorited to be in the finals, but it was also, kind of me making a statement. And like you said, kind of saying, I'm here, this is me. I'm not afraid of what anybody thinks anymore. And really just, was able to kind of, hold my head high and be really proud of that entire competition.
When did you come online? When did you almost just be totally accepting of who you are and just have that courage? And where does that courage come from? Because I imagine there are a lot of people around the world who just don't feel like they could do what you do.
So I came out on October 20th of 2014. And at that point in my life, so I had turned pro as a 105 strongman in November of 2013. Was at this point in my life, I was in graduate school and really just was trying to figure out who the hell I was. And I wasn't happy with my current situation and where I was in life. And, I was living the quote unquote heteronormative life, I guess is what you would say. Like I was in a relationship with a girl and waking up every single day, putting on this facade of pretending to be somebody I wasn't, was exhausting.
Right.
And, I finally woke up one day and I was like, why am I doing this? I'm not happy. This isn't me. And, decided to start figuring out who I was for myself to try to live the life that I've been putting out on social media and living in front of everybody, but deep inside was just miserable and unhappy. So, I started, kind of coming to terms with my sexuality and actually, met Joey, while I was still, quote unquote, in the closet. I wasn't even out yet. And him and I started dating. And, it was really a lot of why it came out was because of him. him and I got into this relationship, and we were dating for, I think it was about a month and a half at the point where I decided to come out. And I realized, we're 22 years old. He had already been out since he was 17. And I didn't feel that it was fair for him to be in a relationship with somebody who wasn't open and accepting of themselves. So I started coming out to my friends and family, in person and over the phone, and then kind of made the proclamation via social media on October 20th. And not realizing that at the time, it wasn't because there was no other openly gay professional strongman. It was honestly just because I wanted to be happy and live my life how I knew I needed to.
Who was the first person you told when you did come out?
Oh gosh. I think it was one of my best friends in from graduate school. We were at the gym together, and I told him, that I'm gay, and having these feelings, and he was over the moon excited for me, and just so accepting. I mean, he I think he started crying before I did, which was pretty amazing, just to get that support and that love right off the bat. And that was pretty much the overwhelming experience that I had when I came out. It was a lot of love and support from everybody, friends, family, and everyone in the strongman community as well. Because, at that time I wasn't well known in the sport. I was competing as a 105-kilo athlete. At I wasn't a heavyweight yet. I wasn't competing at worlds and doing all these big shows. Um, so it was really amazing to still have that support as somebody that wasn't that well known at that point.
And was it scary coming out to your parents? A friend of mine, when he came out to his dad, was the one he was really worried about. And his dad's a man's man, and he actually owns an abattoir. And so when he told his dad, so my friend, I won't say his name in case he listens, but he's about 5'8". His dad's about 6'4", and he owns his abattoir. And he told his dad, already told his mum and his sister, and he said, Dad, I've got something to tell you. I don't know how you're going to react, but I think I should tell you. And I'm gay. And I realized that. And I think it's right that you know. And his dad apparently paused and looked really deeply into his eyes and said, There's one rule with any boyfriend you bring home: no people that don't eat meat. They've got to eat meat, right? He shook his hand, he agreed, and then they've been cool ever since. And I loved,
That's amazing.
and it wasn't nearly as big a thing as he was expecting. He built it up in his head, and he kind of turned into a living nightmare. And he thought, right, I cannot deal with this anymore. I've just got to tell the man. What was it like telling your parents?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't terribly nervous coming out to my mom. Her sister was a lesbian, so I knew my mom was super accepting of the community, and that was never really going to be an issue. Coming out to my dad again, it was a little bit more stressful. So my dad, he's smaller in stature. He's only about 5'8". He's about this big, and but he is an Irish Catholic man from Brooklyn, New York.
Right. Okay.
Like my family, we grew up owning bars in Brooklyn, like, just kind of like very hardy, thick skin, tough family. And so I was definitely a little bit nervous coming out to him. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We were sitting in the cab of his truck, and we're going to get lunch somewhere, and I was like, I need to tell you something. And I was like, I've been having these feelings, and I've realized that I'm gay. And again, there was a pause. He looks over at me, and the first thing he says is, "Can I still say gay jokes?" So here I am with like tears coming down my face, coming out to my dad, and I was like, "That's what you're concerned about?"
That's amazing.
uh, and he's been great ever since.
That's quite that's absolutely quality. Do you have any advice for anyone who is coming out? Because this lockdown is such a weird time for so many things. And I think, we're seeing divorces through the roof, we're also seeing weddings through the roof. But if you are, let's say, holding something back and you're not being who you feel that you really are, a lot of people will be troubled right now. Would you have any advice for the best way to do it?
I think the biggest thing is making sure you're ready.
Okay.
I feel like there's this overwhelming pressure because of social media and, people coming out at earlier ages and, all overwhelmingly, I feel that the trend is moving in a positive direction with people coming out. I think we're seeing less negativity, less hate, less things coming in that direction. Um, but ultimately, people have to realize like you're coming out for you and it's not for anybody else. And I was at a point in my life where I was in a relationship with somebody. I was over the moon happy, and I wanted to be able to share that with people. And I was also at a point in my life where I was confident enough to say, if you don't like this, you can go F off. I don't need you
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
And that is a really powerful place to be in life, where you can be so happy and so confident in yourself, where cutting ties with negative people isn't going to affect you anymore. And I was willing to accept any losses in my life for me to finally experience happiness, because I think when you're coming out, there is a level of selfishness that you have to accept, which is sometimes really hard for people. I feel like a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, when they're coming out, they're like, oh, well, I'm afraid how so and so is going to react. I'm afraid how it's going to affect these people. And you need to take all of that and throw it out the window,
Right.
because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're doing this for yourself.
Yeah.
And once you're able to proclaim your sexuality and finally live as your true self, the door's open, right? Like you're able to experience happiness, you're able to experience true love, all these things that you've been pushing down for so long. So I think the biggest thing is, for anybody that is listening that is wanting to come out, it's just having that little bit of selfishness and confidence to know that your life is going to be better after you come out, because of the things you're able to experience. And that's a hard place to be for some people.
Thank you for that, dude. Do you have a type, by the way? Do you have a kind of guy that you go for?
Yeah, pretty athletic boys like Joey.
Okay, so not too big.
No, no.
So what about the strongman world? Are there actually any hot guys? Because when I see there's an interesting bunch, but I'm not sure how hot any of them are.
Yeah, I mean, if any of the guys listen, they might get flack, because what I find, especially being a gay guy with predominantly mostly straight male friends, is
Right.
they get very, very offended when I tell them that I don't think they're attractive.
I love that. Offended. What? You mean I'm not attractive?
Yeah, yeah, like, sorry, no, dude, you're just not my type. No, I think there are plenty of good-looking guys,
Okay.
but none that I would shack up with at the end of the night.
So not even Luke Stoltman, because we know that the ladies love Luke Stoltman.
No, yeah, he's a pretty boy. He looks good, but it's just not my cup of tea.
Not you. What about someone like I'm trying to think who could be quite Terry Hollins?
Terry, again, but again, like, he's like got that hot dad look,
Okay.
because he I don't want to say he's old, but he's experienced in age.
He's
Um,
mature.
yeah. But yeah, like, so like I said, I typically tend to go for like the more slender, athletic, build.
What's the term? So when I lived with my gay friend, he had words he used like so otters, bears. What's your group that you go for?
So well, I'm obviously a bear.
Right. Yeah.
There's no surprise with that. So I guess my type would be, it's hard, like, Joey likes to say he's a cub right now.
Okay. But to be fair, he's
Um,
putting on size, you are training him
yeah, well,
well.
that's the thing. When we first met, he was a twink.
Right. Okay.
I mean, Joey weighed, I think he weighed about 72 kilos when we first met.
Right.
You know, he was a small guy, but like going back, like he played soccer, he
Yep.
ran track, you know, so he was always doing those more aerobic sports. Um, so yeah, you know, I would say my type is somewhere like so. There's a term called a gym bunny.
Okay, I haven't heard that. Okay.
Gym, yeah. So I think like gym bunny, like cub is kind of like where I'm going.
So in the strongman world, I'm trying to think if there's anyone who I'm trying to think of the smallest strong. Well, I guess kind of in a way, you're one of the smallest guys in the strongman community. So okay,
Yeah, but I'm not even my type.
that's kind of a good thing. It'd be worrying if in the mirror you go, you know what, I kind of like him. In a of all time, in even old school lifters, are there any hot guys there? Because if I were to say it about soccer players, I feel as though you could probably list a few. Whereas strongman is it's a niche community.
Yeah, you know, like I said, I feel like it's just like I said, like there's guys that are attractive, but that's kind of where it goes at the end of, you know, it's like, oh yeah, like you're a good looking dude, and that's about it.
That's as far as it goes. We've obviously
Yeah.
got to talk to you about your strongman. And so, first of all, you got injured going for the well, your own breaking of your own American record, your tricep. How is that now?
It's coming along well. You know, I got a cool scar now, you know,
Yeah,
so
dude.
and you know, it's funny, you know, it's a bad injury. um
Yeah.
I don't think I quite realized how serious it was when it happened, you know, because I think a tricep is a weird one. It doesn't happen often. And I think, you know, we see guys tear their biceps a lot,
Mhm.
or they'll have muscle tears and they're back 3 months ish, they're back full doing their normal gig. Um, and that's just not the case with this injury. So, you know, so I ruptured it. I was going for a log lift of 220 kilos.
Yeah.
And, you know, the frustrating thing is the 2 weeks prior, I hit 219 pretty easily. And there was nothing leading up to that event where I thought I was going to get injured. Everything felt great that day. I had no aches, no pains, nothing. It was just bad positioning, bad timing, and my tricep decided to go. And, you know, I realized it was bad when I came out of surgery because I was talking to the surgeon who's a good friend of mine. And he said, you know, I opened up your arm and actually had to take a step back and rethink how I was going to fix it because it was so much worse than we thought it was on the scans.
Wow.
Um,
Is it a
so the
rupture?
way, yeah, so the way he described it was like a firecracker went off in my tricep. So all
Wow.
the tendon, you know, typically when a tendon tears, it just rips across and it'll come off the bone. Mine exploded. So the tendon was frayed. There were fibers all over the place. So he literally had to rethink his surgical plan after I was already after my arm was already opened up, to try to figure out what the heck he was going to do to get me back to the level I needed to be. So what ended up happening was it took 12 sutures to put the tendon back together.
And to be
And
clear,
then
suture is how you're hooking the actual tendon to the bone.
no, the way the so that's an anchor. And we'll get to that. So the suture is essentially just it took so think of like a zip tie
Yep.
where he had to essentially bring all the pieces back together and then tie it all together into one common tendon to then get a good attachment point into the bone.
Gotcha.
Typically, that doesn't have to happen in these surgeries. He said maybe they do one or two if there's some extra fraying or if there's micro tears somewhere, but so it took 12 to put my tendon back together. And then when they anchor it into the elbow, typically they just do one anchor. They stick it in, you're good to go.
Yeah.
With me, it took four. So they had to drill four holes into my elbow to get a solid attachment point for the tendon to reattach and get everything back in working order.
Is that ultimately partly because you're a freak? As in, if that happens to my tricep, I think they need one anchor and maybe one
Yeah.
suture. Whereas what
Yeah.
you're doing to yourself on a daily basis means your body just isn't going to be normal.
Yeah. And I that's pretty much what he chalked it up as. And it was he it was unexpected for the both of us. I knew what had happened right away. I have a degree in sports medicine. So I knew that that's what happened. And I was totally bummed when I woke up from surgery and realized how bad it actually was. And I think it's definitely, in this sport of strongman, injuries like this, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Um,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, this was my time, and the timing could not have been worse.
Yeah.
Because I was in probably the best shape of my life going into that event and going into the rest of the 2020 competitive year.
What do you take from that? So obviously the event wasn't World's Strongest Man. It was right before World's Strongest Man, which then means you can't compete in the thing that you've been aiming for the last year. Does that mean that moving forward, if feats of strength come back and you get another opportunity, you say, nah, I've got to be focusing on the big one? Or is it, like you say, just part and parcel of rolling the dice?
I think it did put things into perspective a little bit for me. I think, I was talking to my coach, Derek Poundstone,
Hero.
and yeah, he's amazing. And I think the Feats of Strength series was unbelievable. And I have so much gratitude to the guys at World's Ultimate Strongman for putting that on and working so hard for us athletes to be able to compete and do something that's meaningful. But I think it also put into perspective, like, I've achieved the limit of the American log press record. I know I'm strong enough to do it. But there are other goals that I need to work on right now.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that I still haven't achieved in the sport that I want to and I need to, frankly. Um, that is more than just a record. So the way I've set up my entire career is by setting these small attainable goals that I knew I could achieve. And I'm still missing a few steps for me to move on. And so I need to hit those boxes before I think about going back for another record.
Because what I find quite amazing about you is actually on your website, so you say train to be the person they said I would never become. And as soon as I heard that, I thought that, okay, that makes total sense because genetically, you think of Thor, Shaw, Tom Stoltman, all over 6'7", all around 180, 190, 200 kilos, 440 pounds. You think you're sort of 5'10". You mentioned competing at under 105. So as in your natural body size is to walk around at under 105, and here you are competing with the world's strongest. This shouldn't be happening. How are
No,
you doing it?
it's funny you say that quote. So this picture right behind me is actually that's that exact quote. And that's at the foot of my bed. So every morning I wake up, that's what I see.
Love it.
Um, and so, I mean, if you really want to get into the strongman history, so I actually started competing U90 when I first started in this.
that is that is just ridiculous. And how much are you now?
God, so I'm about 128.
So you that is so much extra body weight. Best part of 40 kilos.
Yeah. So when I started this sport back in 2009, I was 17 years old. And yeah, so I started out competing U90 from 2009 to 2011 when I was just getting my feet wet. And I talk about setting these goals that I knew I could achieve. And, when I started the sport, my goal was never to get to this level, to be doing a podcast with guys like you and competing in front of fans of, tens of thousands of people. Because to be frank, I sucked when I started. I really wasn't good. But I just had this love for the sport because it was so much fun and it was so different from anything that I've ever done. So I set these goals to where I would just be increasing little by little every single time. So like my first goal in the sport of strongman was to not take last place in a contest because that happened a lot. I finished last in the first 8 competitions I ever did.
Right.
And then, once I didn't take last, it was like, okay, let's not zero an event at a show. And then after I did that, it was like, okay, we're putting things together. I'm starting to become more of an athlete. Let's get on the podium. And things just kind of snowballed in that direction, to where, in 2011, I jumped up to the 105 class, or 2012, and then ended up winning the North American Amateur National Championships in the 105 division in 2013 to become a pro. And I actually competed as a 105 pro until 2016. So for 4 years, I took second place at America's Strongest Man in that weight category. I still hold the world record for the log lift. At 105, I pressed 186,
Okay.
at 105 body weight.
That's nuts.
Yeah. And so I still have that world record. And then I went to Belfast in 2016 to compete at 105 World's Strongest Man. And it was the hardest and most painful weight cut of my life. And that's when I looked at Joey and I was like, yeah, this is it for me. I'm going to go up to the heavyweight division after this. And that year, I also went and won the log press world championships hosted by Zadrunas Savickas in Lithuania. I competed in the heavyweight division weighing only 112 kilos and I won.
No, that
Yeah. So
ridiculous.
and I beat some big names. I beat Vitas Blakaitis, I beat Vytautas Lalas, I beat Dimitar Savatinov at 112 kilo body weight. I lifted 202.5 for the win. In that it was that moment that I realized, okay, I can be competitive as a heavyweight now. But from the start of my career to that point, it was 8 years.
It is incredible, and it's kind of what Adam Bishop and Graham Hicks did. They started under one. If I went to Adam Bishop's first ever strongman show, it was in a farm, and he was competing against bouncers, and it was one guy had apple crumble as his intra workout, whatever the hell you want to call it. I mean, it was nuts, and to
Amazing.
see that guy where he is now is crazy, much like yourself. But you mentioned the log press world record at under 105. I imagine you have your sights set on something ridiculous in the open category. What is it that works so well for you when it comes to the jerk? Because no one does it, bar you. Everyone presses, Rob Kearney jerks. How tough is that?
So for me, it started because my overhead was abysmal, when I got into this sport. I was horrible at it and it was embarrassing, and I didn't want to go to shows in zero anymore. So, at that point, at that point in my career, I was training with some studs. So I was training with Derek, back in 2009, 2010, when he was at the top of his career.
Right.
He was just coming off a second place at World's Strongest Man, multiple time America's Strongest Man, Arnold champion. Like, he was the cream of the crop. And I was going and getting my ass kicked every single weekend with those guys, and I was tired of it. So at this time, I was also pretty regularly training at a CrossFit gym, um, when I was not with the guys doing events, because at that time, I mean, I was driving about almost 2 hours each way to train strongman with Derek and the crew down there, while I was, in uni. So during the week, I would train mainly at a CrossFit gym, and the coaches were like, listen, like, let's get you doing some Olympic lifts, let's get you doing some like split jerks and stuff like that to help in strongman. And started on a barbell, got pretty comfortable with it. And I was hitting maybe about 75, 80 kilos overhead for my working sets. And then getting into the split jerk, it was like, okay, now I'm working at 100, 105, 110. It was starting to get better. I was getting more comfortable with the lift. And then I was like, well, if it's working this well with a barbell, let's try it with a log. And I just started playing around with it and trying to get comfortable. And it is so weird and so intimidating when you're starting off, because when you're jerking a barbell, there's nothing in front of your face, so you can see where you're going. When you have a log on your chest, you're looking up at the sky. So it's hard to find how you're going to move with this big awkward implement on your chest. And it took a lot of time. And, I think that just it comes down to, like, I've been in the sport for a long time. I haven't been that well known for that long, but again, I've been doing this sport for 11 years now. Um, and it took years and years and years of me practicing and getting better at it to get to the point that I'm at now. Um, and yeah, it really just stems from not being good enough and changing the event to work for me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been able to be so successful at this level while being so small. Because I've had to study the sport, and I think I became a student of the sport really quickly because I saw what the top guys were doing. I realized I couldn't do it that way, but let me pick apart their technique a little bit. Let me steal a little bit from this side, steal a little bit from this side, put it together into a technique and a formula that works for me. And that's how I ended up here.
So how do you structure your training program? Is in terms of what does your week look like now? If you weren't,
So yeah, so I've been working with Derek for 2.5 years now at this point, and it's by far the best thing that's ever happened in my career is being able to have him as my coach and my friend and my mentor. So the training that we're going through right now is, and the way it's pretty much been is just it's 4 days a week. It's a pretty basic split. Um, and no surprise, there's a lot of pressing. So, day one is going to be an overhead and shoulders day. Day two, I squat and deadlift on the same day. Day three is what I call like my bro day. So it's like bench and arms. And so it's like every lifter's favorite day, my least favorite day. Um, and then the weekends is event training. And as we get closer to contests, we incorporate some events during the week. So it's, my day one for my overhead day. If it's a dumbbell, an axle, or a log, that'll be my overhead movement on day one, and then accessories to follow. Day two, deadlift and squat. I'm always going to squat no matter what. But if it's a car deadlift or a side handle deadlift, we'll switch that into the mix.
okay.
So it's a little bit fluid, but that's pretty much the structure. Is overhead, squat, deadlift, bench, and then events.
And do you periodize what you're doing, or do you keep the actual volume quite similar throughout your training program?
It's pretty much high all the time, to be honest. We adjust intensities based on the day. So, but to be honest, like, I don't get structured deloads. I think a lot of guys do, but I mean, gosh, leading up to World's Strongest Man, I think, or no, actually, you know what? For the Arnold back in March of 2020, um, the only deload, so I got a deload the week before that contest, but the deload I got before that was the week after World's Strongest Man, which was June of 2019.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Your body holds up through that.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a little bit of the madness that Derek puts down on paper. But essentially the way he works it and the way I really like it, and it's actually oddly enough, his methodology is very similar to the coach I had when I turned pro was Mike Jenkins.
Oh,
Um,
hero, rest in peace.
so so I worked with Mike for almost a full year. I turned pro in October of 2013, and then unfortunately he passed away just a few weeks later. Um, but Mike and Derek both have the same mentality is, you need to earn your deload. You need to work hard enough to where your body says, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And we got to that point when we're leading up to the Arnold where, like, I was beat to hell and I was struggling those last few weeks of training. And Derek's response was, yeah, I was kind of waiting for you to get to this point because now your body needs a break. But up to that point, like, I was doing everything he threw at me, and I was just kind of taking it in stride and putting my head down. And I think that's one thing that makes me a good athlete is I don't question things. And that's why I need a good coach, because if the coach is going to put it down on paper, I'm going to do it. and I just kind of I follow it blindly, and I just trust the process. And I think when you do that, it opens up the doors to allow you to do things you didn't think were possible. Before working with Derek, I was one of those guys that I would take a deload probably every 5 to 6 weeks pretty regularly. And then Derek completely flipped that up on its end. And now I get one, I maybe get 2 to 3 a year.
Which, if you told me that ahead of this conversation, I'd say, no, I don't believe you. I'm going to ask that question and find out that's not true. But, but that whole thing you're saying about just committing to a process, that's really interesting, because the thing about, say, for example, your jerk is that it's on an Olympic bar. It's the same Olympic bar no matter what the competition. Logs change in every aspect, namely your hand position. So if you've been drilling something and now you're 3 inches wider or 3 inches narrower, on a jerk, that's going to cause some serious technical issues in a movement that's technical on an Olympic bar. So the fact that you just can go switch off, just do it, that's probably testimony to your success.
Yeah, I mean, but I also play around with that in my training, where I will never train on the same log every single week. So I'm fortunate enough to be at a gym where we have a few different options for logs that are close enough to what we're going to be using in a competition. And I make sure that I change it up every single week. So even if it's just a simple accessory movement where I'm just doing a log strict press that week, and if it's not too heavy, I'm going to switch it up. I'm not going to use the one that feels the best. I'm not going to use the one that I'm most comfortable on. I'm going to use every single piece of equipment that I have, because again, like you've been around the sport. We're never using the same kit at a contest.
Right.
It's different every single show. And I think that was the biggest thing when I went to Log Press World Championships in 2016, where I won. We showed up and it was the biggest effing log I've ever seen in my life. Like we typically use 12-inch diameter logs.
Yeah.
Pretty standard. I show up to Lithuania, and Savickas, being the sick bastard he is, we're using a 13.5-inch diameter log.
Was it
I
metal?
mean, this thing is just massive. Yeah, so it's metal. It was it's actually an iconic log. It was used in the IFSA circuit back in the mid 2000s.
Rolls up
And the
nicely,
thing,
that log, though.
yeah, but for an athlete like me who's using a split jerk, my hand position just went from here to here. So the log is further out in front of me, which on the dip portion of the press is going to pull me more forward. So now I have to think about that. We're also on a springy stage with AstroTurf. So I need to figure out how my feet are going to move on this stage, which actually in that competition, my second attempt, my foot got stuck and I missed the lift. So it was 190 kilos. So I cleaned it. I missed the jerk and had 60 seconds. So I had to repick it and repress it. And I got the lift in that time. But I think it's just being able to switch things up in training to make it as unpredictable as possible is going to set you up for success at a show, because nothing is standard in this sport.
But it's interesting your ability to adapt, because I remember at North America's, I'm going to go 2019, with COVID, I've kind of lost track of time, but you went for a record on the axle, which is, again, it's going to go overhead, but it's a different hand position, different implement. Again, you were unsuccessful that day, and you could see how gutted you were because you knew it was in you.
Yeah, but to be honest, that was a mistake on my part. I made an error because it was hot that day,
Really?
and I made the mistake of not doing what I did in training, which was taking my shirt off after each attempt to dry my chest and dry the shirt that I was wearing. So it's amazing that even after 11 years of doing the sport, even the best of us still make rookie mistakes. And I 100% confident I could have been close to that world record that day. I had hit 220 in training before on the axle. And for me, it was a matter of getting it to my shoulders, because I knew on an axle I could jerk plenty of weight on an axle because it was so much easier than a log. But it was getting that clean. And unfortunately, when I went for that 200 kilos, I knew it right away too. Once it got onto my stomach, um, I was in my head, I was like, You, I messed this up. I didn't do what I had done every single training session leading up to this show. I threw it out the window on that event. And, unfortunately, that just kind of set the tone for the entire competition for me. And, that Giants live show was probably one of my worst showings. I took fourth place, which, is not terrible, but for that competition, I should have won that show. And just having one bad event to start off where you think you're going to do really well. It just I got into my head for the rest of the show and unfortunately had a bad performance that day, which it happens.
America's kind of the depth of talent they've now got is massive. Whether it's Evan Singleton, Kevin Fairs, Trey Mitchell. I'm trying to think who else performed well that day. Obviously yourself. Brian wasn't competing, but it really is getting better and better as the years go on. There are people I've missed out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think of guys like Bobby Thompson, who
Oh,
just kind of burst into the scene in the last year and a half. I'll never forget, that was one of my worst yoke performances as well. At that contest, and I'll never forget, he beat me in that event, and he said, "This is one of the highlights of my career,
that's cool.
beating me in yoke."
That's
Which is, yeah, being on my end, it's like, yeah, shit, I just lost, but that's cool to hear as well. So it was the talent pool in this sport is just getting so amazing and also so frustrating at the same time. Because we have to fight, we have to fight to keep our name relevant and fight to be, keep coming back to these shows. And it's just getting harder and harder every year to get to the top, to get to World's Strongest Man, to get to the Arnold. It's getting tougher and tougher.
just finally, Mix. I know you've got to go off to work, so appreciate your time massively. Is where do you see the next 5 years for you in this sport? Because you're somebody that really studies it. You're not somebody that just goes for it and happy-go-lucky, see what happens. So I imagine you've got a linear kind of objective and goal in mind.
Yeah, it's funny. Joey and I, we talk about this all the time too. Him and I, we just turned 29. And I told him like 35 is when I turn 35, that's going to be kind of my my gauge of where I'm at in my career. Um, if I am still progressing, if I'm still doing really well, I'm going to keep going and see where I can get to. But if I've kind of stalled out and I'm not really performing like I should and like I have been in the past, I'm probably going to bow out gracefully and be unbelievably grateful for the career that I had. Like I said before, I shouldn't be doing this stuff. I shouldn't be at this level. And it's honestly just a dream come true to be able to share my story, compete with these amazing guys, and be in front of these crowds. And but I think I'm always going to be involved with the sport. I think my biggest goal is to kind of actually along the lines of what you're doing is getting into sports commentary and announcing. That's where I see myself going in the sport and still being able to give back, because this sport has been my life for 11 years, and I don't see myself ever being away from it. Um, but I still have a lot of goals that I want to achieve. I mean, I talked about setting those goals and having those steps. I still haven't made the finals at World's Strongest Man, so that is number one. I want to be top 5 at the Arnold Strongman Classic, so that's right there as well. But to be totally honest, like, I don't think winning those is out of my reach as well. I think getting one of those trophies is up there for me, and I told this to Joey and he doesn't believe me, but I've said, like, if I win World's Strongest Man, I'm probably going to pull an Eddie Hall and retire on the spot, because in my mind, there's no going up from there. I don't know if an athlete like myself could repeat that. It'd be unbelievably difficult. So for me to go out on top with the World's Strongest Man win, I would be happy to hang up my shoes right then and there, and go on my merry way as the World's Strongest Man champion. So that's ultimately that is the goal.
And Novikov has kind of communicated, I think, to so many people that it is not the land of the giants alone. They're actually, so for the likes of yourself, Kevin Fairs, Graham Hicks, people of a, and I don't know if I can call you a smaller athlete, but next to those guys, you actually are smaller athletes, but that you can not only compete, not only final, but actually be on top of the podium. That guy, I think, has been an inspiration to a new potential breed of strongman.
I mean, to be honest, it was inspiring to me. Not being at World's Strongest Man this year and then seeing him hold that trophy, it was like, damn, he did it. He did it for us, which was so exciting, and it kind of renewed a sense of excitement for me as well. Because, to be honest, I definitely have gotten in my head over the past couple of years where, as an athlete that's my size, you think like, oh, well, you have to be big, you have to be, this tall, you have to weigh this much in order to be really successful in this sport. And, I think Novikov just flipped that up on its end and said, no, you don't, and I think where you see the sport is going, obviously you have to be strong as hell, but we're also seeing this new level of athleticism from these athletes where that does tailor itself to the smaller guys. Being able to move a little bit faster, recover quicker in between events, it helps guys of a smaller stature. So, I just have to, keep the pedal to the metal, keep working just as hard and try to get on that podium.
Rob, it's been a pleasure talking to you, mate. I hope you rehab really well. Regards to Joey, and we can't wait to see you back at World's Strongest Man or at Giants Live very soon.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Naked bacon. One day, all bacon will be made this way.